The first sound that cut through the packed auditorium wasn't applause or debate chatter. It was a plea. Karoline Leavitt's voice cracked, high-pitched with desperation. As she clutched her microphone and begged Jasmine Crockett to drop the $80 million lawsuit looming over her political career, the words spilled out, not like an argument, but like a lifeline. Frayed and breaking under the searing heat of cameras and stage lights, she spoke of ruin, of destruction, of how everything would collapse if Crockett didn't show mercy. The more she spoke, the thinner her voice grew, trembling at the edges. The audience froze in disbelief. This wasn't power or strategy they were seeing. It was collapse, live and unfiltered. Gasps coursed through the hall, the sound of hundreds of people trying to process that a figure who so often dressed her. Rhetoric and bravado had just let the armor fall away in front of millions watching. And as Leavitt's words cracked, all eyes swiveled toward her opponent. Jasmine Crockett did not move. She didn't shift her weight, didn't blink too quickly, didn't fumble for words. Her eyes remained fixed, steady, cold. Her hands folded neatly at the podium. She radiated, the kind of composure that can't be faked. Against Leavitt's unraveling desperation, Crockett's silence thundered as the dominant force in the room. Duh. The contrast was cinematic, one woman unraveling, the other carved from steel. You could feel the audience holding its breath, mesmerized. Phone. Screens lit like stars as clips began streaming in real time. Crowds outside the hall, millions at home, strangers scrolling half a world away all, began to witness the split-screen spectacle. One figure begging, the other radiating unforgiving calm. Social media tickers exploded with captions. Is this really happening? She's begging on stage. Look at Crockett's face. The moment was no longer confined to the auditorium. It had erupted into the bloodstream of the internet in real time. But as the feeds surged and the air thickened, Crockett still hadn't said a word. That silence became its own power, a countdown. Audiences didn't even realize they were holding, but no one could have predicted how Jasmine Crockett would respond, or how cold her answer would be. $8 million. That number alone crackled in the air with a kind of force money usually exerts only in boardrooms or Wall Street headlines. But inside that packed auditorium, the amount wasn't being treated as an abstract figure on a legal document. It was being treated as a ticking time bomb that could obliterate a political career. The lawsuit hanging over Karoline Leavitt wasn't some procedural dispute. It had become a symbol proof to some that corruption was finally being dragged into the sunlight. To others, a reminder that no amount of campaign polish could cover the scent of evasion. For Leavitt, the legal fight was more than financial. Devastation. It was existential. Her brand, her carefully plotted rise, her ability to cast herself as perpetually in control, all of it was under threat. $80 million wasn't just a lawsuit to her. It was the number that could brand her forever as a fraud in the public record. No donor could spin it away. No press secretary could downplay it. If Crockett refused her plea, the slow leak of credibility could burst wide open into a career-ending collapse. That's why the desperation in her voice didn't sound strategic. It sounded primal, as if she were begging, not just for cash or reputation, but for oxygen. Crockett, however, carried the lawsuit as something bigger than herself. To her supporters, and to communities long deprived of accountability, her refusal wasn't cruelty, was courage. Walking away would have been easier. Settling or softening would have avoided conflict. But Crockett's resistance symbolized fidelity to justice, a loyalty to the people who sent her into that hall. If Leavitt believed money and titles could wash away arrogance, Crockett was standing there as living proof that dignity doesn't fold for bribes disguised as settlements. Audience understood even if the headlines had not yet caught up. They realized this clash wasn't paperwork or legalese. It was survival. It was about whether truth can still hold power against polished deception. It was about whether grit and community dignity can stare down privilege without blinking. $1 million was the banner headline. But underneath that weight loomed something more terrifying for Leavitt's exposure. And that exposure was already seeping onto every phone and tablet across America. The viral clips capturing her public begging weren't just humiliating. They reframed her image in real time, where once she had stood as the youthful, unflappable conservative firebrand. She was now cemented in the public eye as desperate, pleading, fragile. No focus group could erase the optics of reality. Hundreds in the audience had witnessed it, and millions more were hitting replay on their streams. Crockett's unflinching stillness amplified the symbolism. With each minute, she stood composed. She seemed less like just a politician and more like an immovable pillar, living embodiment of communities who have been told to back down, only to decide instead to stand stubbornly tall. If Leavitt was the plea for mercy, Crockett became the face of accountability, refusing to blink. The drama intensified, because both women knew it wasn't confined to the stage. This moment was going to outlive them. It would ripple through commentaries, through cable news chirons, through dinner table debates about what America rewards panic or poise, excuses or endurance. Leavitt's desperation was an attempt to stop time and freeze the storm. Crockett's silence made clear the storm was only just beginning. Tension climbed as every second passed without Crockett's reply. Spectators leaned in, aware that whatever she eventually said would be clipped, memed, immortalized. That knowledge weighed heavier than the lawsuit itself, because in politics, perception can sear deeper than verdicts. The lawsuit was dollars on paper, but the meaning stretched so much further it became a national referendum on whether integrity still mattered. The stakes weren't just dollars, they were dignity. And the closer the spotlight pressed, the more cracks appeared. Karoline Leavitt built her persona like it was a brand launch. Every word, every soundbite, every carefully crafted post on social media projected the image of a rising conservative firebrand. Crisp lines, sharp rhetoric, a polish meant to dazzle and disarm. She was young, articulate, cloaked in the armor of a movement that thrives on optics. Her speeches leaned into confident jabs, and her personal narrative was sculpted to suggest inevitability. As if stardom was destiny rather than construction, the media, always hungry for new faces to slot into predictable roles, obliged. Headlines cast her as the next weapon for her party, a disruptor who could unleash soundbite blitzkriegs with a smile, but beneath that varnish, contradictions pulsed like fault lines beneath a shiny building. Leavitt's populist image, the tough outsider willing to speak fearlessly, was undercut by her privilege. For every fiery remark about fighting for the people, there existed a parallel truth. She had long been insulated from the various struggles she claimed to champion. While she claimed authenticity, her image was curated by insiders. While she blasted establishment elites, her survival often depended on the very donors and power brokers she publicly lambasted. The gloss of her boldness masked cracks, and the cracks widened as the pressures grew. The arrogance wasn't hidden, it was highlighted. On stage and in interviews, she would dismiss opponents with smirks, laugh off legitimate criticisms, and mischaracterize communities she barely understood. Opponents' lived realities became her punchlines. When called out, she leaned further in, wrapping the condescension in tones of humor or faux indignation, as though to say, "How dare you question me?" To her supporters, that brashness read as fearlessness. To her critics, it looked like entitlement, masquerading as courage. That tendency to conflate mockery with strength became a dangerous habit. Small controversies piled up, tone-deaf remarks about working families, careless dismissals of immigrant struggles, clips where she spoke glowingly of freedom yet sneered at protests demanding exactly that. Commentators pointed out the hypocrisy, but Leavitt seemed almost addicted to the cycle of provocation and attention. For her, any spotlight was good. Spotlight criticism only reinforced her narrative of being unapologetic. This strategy worked in safe spaces where audiences were primed to clap at every barbed one-liner, but it grew brittle under broader pressure. Moments when she was forced off script revealed nerves behind the smile. When pushed on specifics, her voice would tighten, answers stumble. Critics noticed the shift, cataloging the moments where her flourish dissolved into fragility. Yet her team doubled down, convinced the fiery brand would outweigh the Mistakes her rise carried with it the illusion of invulnerability, supported by well-funded networks, cushioned by mentors and strategists. She walked with the confidence of someone who had never truly been forced to stand, exposed without scaffolding. But public life has a way of cutting deeper than curated narratives allow. The further she climbed, the more brittle her foundation became. Then came the lawsuit, the test she couldn't meme away, couldn't spin into a slogan, $80 million. It loomed larger than any controversy before, tying together threads of corruption and accountability that her opponents had long whispered about. Suddenly, the carefully cultivated posture of invincibility was thrust against an immovable wall of consequence. Her response followed the pattern. Fight it in the public eye. Mock the claims, dismiss the legitimacy. But lawsuits aren't debates, and ridicule doesn't erase court filings. The stakes so high, her contradictions became impossible to ignore. Her refusal to acknowledge limits became a stage for desperation. That's why when she stood on that debate stage opposite Jasmine Crockett, her voice cracking as she pleaded for a reprieve, it didn't come out of nowhere. It was the inevitable culmination. The arrogance that had once been framed as bravery snapped into desperation, a firebrand exposed as fragile. Years of contradictions, tone-deaf dismissals, and the overconfidence of privilege condensed into that one moment when the polish peeled away. The villain's downfall is never about one mistake. It's about the foundation beneath them finally crumbling under too much weight. Leavitt's foundation was brittle all along, glossed over by bravado and sharpened rhetoric, reinforced with entitlement, hollowed by contradiction. She had always believed confidence could disguise fragility, till fragility screamed through, and when Crockett finally faced her, that fragility lit up under the cameras like glass under fire. Jasmine Crockett's story does not begin on a brightly lit stage or in polished arenas of power. It begins in the quieter corners of America, where struggle is daily and perseverance is instinct. Her rise was not fueled by privilege or insulation, but by an unyielding belief that dignity matters most when it's hardest to maintain. Where Karoline Leavitt was cushioned, Crockett was tempered. Every hardship, every obstacle, every unseen act of resilience forged into the steel that now held her calm beneath blinding lights. Asterisk, she was the daughter of a community that knew storms well. Families in her world didn't have billion-dollar backstops or pedigreed lifelines. They had grit. She saw neighbors work multiple jobs to keep the lights on, new classmates who translated for immigrant parents during school meetings, and watched too many people dismissed by the very systems meant to serve them. These experiences didn't make her bitter. They made her hungry to bend those systems just a little closer toward justice. When she chose law, it wasn't to chase prestige. While her peers lined up for internships at gleaming corporate offices, Crockett walked down narrower corridors, legal aid clinics, public defenders' offices, crowded community hearings. Her first clients were people whose names never trended but whose cases meant life, livelihood, or the difference between stability and despair. She worked late nights, often sleeping at her desk with a single lamp burning, the soft hum of the city outside, poring over files for clients who couldn't afford big law representation. She believed each case mattered not because it made headlines, but because it saved someone who had been told their story didn't count. Her early victories never made newspapers. They were the kind that happened at kitchen tables when a family realized they wouldn't lose their home, or when an immigrant mother understood she wouldn't be deported because someone actually fought for her. Each of these small triumphs built a reputation. Crockett didn't fold, didn't flinch, and didn't abandon her clients, no matter how intense the pressure grew. That steadiness began to follow her. Her community noticed, during a particularly brutal winter storm. When statewide failures left residents without power and families trapped in cold homes, Crockett refused to wait for official relief. She coordinated blanket drives, checked on families directly, and stood shoulder to shoulder with people the state had left in the dark. Neighbors recall her showing up unexpectedly with food and water, her coat dusted with snow, her presence a reminder that someone still cared. No cameras rolled, no headlines documented it, but those moments cemented her in the hearts of those she served. Her leadership wasn't declared, it was lived, That same determination pushed her into the political arena, though every rung was a battle. She didn't have network machines behind her or corporate checks that smoothed paths for her. Others, what she had was endurance and the trust of those who knew her firsthand. She built campaigns the way she built cases, one person at a time, one door knocked at a time, fueled not by entitlement but by necessity. Volunteers were family and friends, small donations collected in jars at community centers, rallies held. In borrowed spaces or streets, they swept themselves afterwards. When the establishment dismissed her, she smiled. When skeptics whispered that she lacked polish, she doubled down on authenticity. And when insiders insisted she couldn't win, she simply kept showing up until her presence became undeniable. Election night victories felt less like coronations and more like confirmations, that resilience could topple assumption, that humility could outperform arrogance, that grassroots endurance could rewrite who deserved to lead. Through all of it, calm iron remained her trademark. She had seen tempers erupt in courtrooms, seen powerful voices berate and demean opponents. But she understood something deeper, that fury often revealed fragility. Stillness, on the other hand, unnerved arrogance like nothing else could. She learned to wield silence like a weapon, legitimacy like armor. Her voice rarely cracked, her body language rarely wavered. That composure was not passive, it was defiance. Born from weathering storms larger than insults, it was no accident that the public began to see her as not just a leader, but a mirror for themselves. Progressives, immigrants, and working-class Americans found in her a reflection of their own battles. Those who had ever been told to sit down, to be quiet, to wait their turn, saw in her refusal to bend a kind of collective triumph. Crockett's steel was theirs, too, a lineage of endurance passed from one generation surviving hardship to the next, refusing to be silent about it. So when she walked into that debate hall, illuminating it not with volume but with unshaken composure, it wasn't surprising to those who knew her. She carried too many stories to crack easily. Every plea for her to slow down, every dismissal. She had endured every icy night spent, helping neighbors' survival of it settled in her bones, turning her into the woman who could stand upon a stage and radiate patience while someone else unraveled inches away. What the audience didn't know in that moment, what millions watching from their phones couldn't see, was that Crockett's calm was decades in the making. It wasn't a performance, and it wasn't easy. It was the result of storms survived, lessons absorbed, and scars turned into shields. That is why her silence in the face of desperation carried such weight. It wasn't an act. It was her truth forged into steel she had carried others under. Storms before, but this storm would test her steel in front of the entire nation. The debate had settled into a rhythm that audiences knew well. Pointed questions, sharp exchanges, rehearsed one-liners. But on this night the rhythm kept faltering because Karoline Leavitt could not keep herself contained. From the moment Jasmine Crockett opened her mouth, Leavitt jumped in with interruptions, her voice cutting over Crockett's measured statements. At first it sounded like confidence, a jab to keep her opponent off balance. By the third interruption, it sounded like panic clawing for dominance. The words spilling too quickly, too sharp, too defensive. Every interruption carried barbs. Leavitt accused Crockett of being naive, of failing to understand the gravity of real politics. She framed the lawsuit as a smear campaign, sneering at Crockett's insistence that accountability mattered. "You don't know how many people's futures you're gambling with," she snapped at one point, her hands flailing for emphasis. But Crockett did not rise. She placed both hands neatly on the podium, her body language calm, unshaken, her eyes locked forward with a patience that only infuriated her opponent further. That composure was eerie in its effectiveness. Nothing rattled her. Where Harris had screamed in another confrontation, Leavitt resorted to jabs that ricocheted off the wall of Crockett's silence. The more Crockett stayed still, the more Leavitt's voice strained, until the audience began shifting uneasily in their seats. By mid-exchange, the imbalance was glaring. This wasn't a fight of equals. It was one woman spiraling while the others simply endured. The crowd picked up on it. Murmurs broke out. A laugh here, a gasp there, the sound of a couple hundred. people registering just how lopsided the energy felt. Leavitt was loud, but loud carried diminishing returns once it looked frantic. Crockett's stillness wasn't passive. It became a presence stronger than any outburst. Every time Leavitt lunged, the crowd's eyes darted to Crockett, as if waiting for some inevitable moment of reckoning, and Leavitt felt it. Her barbs became sharper, more personal. She accused Crockett of enjoying attention, of putting on a performance, accusations that said more about her own fears than Crockett's intentions. Her voice lifted, cracked, then lifted again. She gestured so wildly that at one point she knocked her microphone slightly off balance, drawing a chorus of whispers as stagehands scrambled to steady it. Crockett, by contrast, kept her chin slightly lifted, expression neutral, eyes fixed ahead. She did not smirk, did not sigh, did not allow herself a flicker of satisfaction. That restraint made her seem untouchable. And in politics, untouchable can be devastating. Under the blazing cameras, Leavitt's grasp of control slipped further. With each minute, she faced silence instead of retaliation. When debate moderators tried to reel her in, Leavitt pushed louder, even talking over their efforts. The urgency in her tone no longer resembled strategy with survival. And then the crescendo. Sensing the optics tipping against her, she pivoted away from attacks and into what no one expected: pleading. Her polished sound bites evaporated. Her practiced calm crumbled. She raised her voice not to argue, but to beg. Pointing across the stage at Crockett, desperation dripping from each syllable, Leavitt pleaded, "You don't have to do this. Just drop it. Drop the lawsuit before it destroys everything for me, for those who believe in me, please." The room froze. There were no gasps this time, only silence. Every phone recording from every angle captured the same startling scene. A political figure who built her image on dominance, now unraveling into supplication. Crockett's stillness had driven her opponent past every shield. No campaign staff, no donors, no consultants, to intervene a lonely raw vulnerability, to cracking live under lights, and then the plea was spoken aloud, the moment cameras would replay. Endlessly the plea echoed long after the words left Karoline Leavitt's mouth. Please, just drop it. The sound of a politician unraveling publicly is not easily forgotten, and in that auditorium you could almost hear the collective heartbeat skip. For a moment, no one dared move. Even the camera crews, trained to capture drama with precision, seemed hesitant to cut angles. It's unwilling to interrupt what was fast becoming an indelible image. Leavitt's voice, normally polished, usually armed with clipped precision, now hung in fragments across the stage. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. It spread over the audience, pressing down on them like a weight. Spectators leaned forward compulsively, unable to look away. Phones already recording wobbled slightly in the hands of their owners. They knew instinctively that history was happening in slow motion right before them. And then, at the center of it all, Jasmine Crockett. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink rapidly. She didn't rush to respond, as so many might. Instead, she let the oxygen drain from the room. Each second stretched longer, building an unbearable tension. Leavitt shifted nervously, trying for a smile that twitched instead into something brittle. Crockett stood, spine straight, hand folded neatly against her podium, as if she had all the time in the world. Seconds ticked by. The hall was still as glass. Then, with a calm voice pitched low and deliberate, Crockett finally spoke. "Madame Leavitt," she said softly, clearly enough that the microphones carried her words with crystalline clarity. $80 million is not simply a number on a page. It represents accountability. It represents every person who has ever been lied to, dismissed, or treated as if justice only applies to the powerful when convenient. Gasps rippled instantly through the audience. She didn't need to raise her voice. The sharpness of her truth cut louder than shouting ever could. Leavitt's face stilled into forced composure, lips pressed tightly together. Eyes betraying the panic she tried desperately to contain. Crockett, however, was not finished. "You ask me," she continued, her tone steady as stone to drop, "what is uncomfortable for you? But what about what's been uncomfortable for the families who built this country while fighting to be seen? What about the humiliation endured by people who never had this stage, who could never beg their way out of consequences? The audience fell dead silent again, could feel every word landing, sharp and deliberate, drilling down into the contradiction. Between Leavitt's plea and the community's Crockett had come to represent, the silence felt sacred, like everyone understood they were witnessing testimony. It's not mere debate. Leavitt forced a laugh, a brittle chuckle, a small lifting of her chin as though to shake off the sting. The camera's merciless, caught the faint, reddening at her cheeks. Her supporters in the room shifted uncomfortably, hands half clapping, then quickly stilling when they realized the crowd wasn't with them. Crockett leaned in slightly, narrowing her focus, her tone chilly but dignified. "Please," she repeated Leavitt's own word, inflecting it like a mirror. That word is powerful when used by communities pleading for fair wages, for safety, for health care, for dignity. But it sounds different when it comes from someone who only uses it after being cornered by accountability. That broke the room. Some gasped audibly. Others let out low murmurs that swelled without containing. And then the applause began, not loud at first, but insistent, inevitable. A few clapped, then dozens, then hundreds, until the hall erupted in thunder. The eruption was deafening. People rose to their feet, shouting with joy, clapping until their palms stung. Leavitt's composure crumbled further. Her smile widened artificially, detached from her eyes. She attempted to nod at the crowd, but it looked weak, obligatory. The more her face searched for control, the more obvious the unraveling became. Crockett, in contrast, didn't smile broadly. She simply absorbed the applause with the same poise she had worn the entire time, as if to say, control cannot be faked, it can only be lived. And then Crockett delivered the line that would seal the night, the kind of sentence that lives forever on highlight reels. She waited again for silence, lowering her voice almost to a whisper so the audience had to strain to hear. 80 million is what the lawsuit says. But respect, madam, Leavitt, respect, costs far more. You can't buy it back once you've begged it away. The words fell like a gavel. The eruption was instantaneous, louder than before, shaking the rafters with applause, whistles, cheers. People stood on chairs, pointing at Crockett, chanting her name. In living rooms across the country, viewers hit replay on their feeds, texting friends to watch this exact moment for the audience there in person. It was impossible not to sense they had just witnessed a mic drop that would live on for years. Leavitt's face told the other half of the story, panic flickering in her eyes, cold perspiration glimmering under stage lights, the rigid mask pulling tighter but breaking at the edges. She half lifted her hand as if to claim rebuttal, but dropped it almost immediately, each movement betraying how thoroughly control had slipped away. Meanwhile, Crockett's final image was iconic, immovable, steady, radiating calm authority while the applause cascaded. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She dismantled arrogance with composure and left her opponent, shattered by silence and dignity. The camera zoomed in and split-screened the stage. One side Leavitt, flustered and unraveling, the other Crockett, serene and unstoppable. The contrast told the story without words, the scream versus the whisper. Desperation versus dignity, panic versus poise. That was the heartbeat of the night. When the eruption finally settled back into breath, the debate itself felt irrelevant. What lingered was one cold reply, delivered with composure so cutting it eclipsed everything else. Crockett had elevated herself from participant to symbol, her reply transforming into something larger than politics. But the echo didn't stop. At the walls of that hall, the world outside amplified it into a roar. It didn't take hours. It didn't even take minutes. Within seconds of Jasmine Crockett's cold, measured reply, the clips hit the bloodstream of the internet like electric current. Hashtags ignited across platforms until the digital space pulsed with the moment. Hashtag cold reply broke into the top 10 in less than 10 minutes. By the half-hour mark, hashtag justice over begging was trending nationwide. By the end of the night, hashtag strength and dignity was #1 in the world. The split screen captured by a dozen different angles became the iconic image, Karoline Leavitt at the podium, hands pleading, eyes glassy with desperation, contrasted. Against Crockett carved like marble, steady and unmoored by the storm raging around her. Memes proliferated Leavitt, captioned with lines like "volume does not equal vision" or "pleas is not policy" beneath her distorted, anxious expression. Crockett's stillness captioned simply, "this is leadership." It was cinematic, tailor-made for virality, and the internet did what it always does: remix, repeat, magnify. On TikTok, users layered Crockett's final mic drop line over swelling music, cutting side by side with images of suffragettes, civil rights icons, immigrants holding their first citizenship papers. Instagram Reels slowed her words into slow motion, adding bold subtitles. Respect costs far more, and you can't buy it back once you've begged it away. Countless creators stitched their reactions, often yelling into their cameras with disbelief or awe. She ended her. "Did you see that?" But admiration wasn't just coming from everyday users. Celebrities weighed in almost immediately. A Grammy-winning singer tweeted, "Calm is the new power. Crockett just proved it to the world." An Emmy-nominated actor posted the clip with the caption, "This belongs in a movie, but it was real life. That's strength." Even veteran athletes chimed in, one writing, "That's how you handle pressure, ice cold." Their reactions only amplified the cultural gravity of the moment, elevating Crockett beyond politics into the realm of symbol. Meanwhile, rival politicians scrambled for footing in the sudden aftershocks. Progressive leaders praised openly, flooding feeds with applause, emojis, soundbites, and statements framing Crockett's performance as much more than political theater. It was generational leadership. "That moment wasn't about one lawsuit," wrote one senator. "It was about showing the entire country what composure under fire really looks like." Moderates called it refreshing. Even conservatives, unaligned with Leavitt, privately messaged reporters that the optics were brutal. The begging was indefensible, the calm reply unforgettable. The grassroots response was perhaps most telling. Watch parties across the country uploaded their unfiltered reactions, living rooms erupting into cheers, college dorms exploding as students replayed the moment 4, 5, 6 times in a row. In immigrant communities, her line about respect hit home with visceral force. A father was shown hugging his daughter tightly in a grainy phone video, saying, "That's exactly what we've been trying to tell you. Stand tall, never back down." A group of organizers recorded themselves holding up signs the morning after reading, cold.com/power. For those who had spent years unheard, Crockett wasn't simply Jasmine Crockett the politician anymore. She had been transformed into a stand-in for a shared experience, the one who refused to bow to arrogance, whose refusal validated an entire demographic's lived resilience. She became internet shorthand for poiser-likeness turned into stickers, GIFs, memes, slogans on t-shirts already circulating within 24 hours. International press took note quickly. British tabloids splashed the images across their front pages, offering commentary on the American who silenced desperation with dignity. French outlets analyzed its symbolism for global politics, theorizing about a new generation of cool-headed leaders. Latin American broadcasts praised Crockett as embodying immigrant grit and aspiration, framing her reply as an inspiration for entire diasporas. It wasn't just a U.S. moment anymore. It became planetary. The visuals translated into every language, one leader begging, another refusing to bend. Back home, cable networks aired the clip on repeat. Panel shows deconstructed the pause, the silence, the cadence of Crockett's reply as if it were theater. Commentators spoke about body language like detectives at a crime scene. Notice how she doesn't blink. Notice how she lets the pause breathe. And analysts labeled it the masterclass in control under pressure, their voices though endless. All returned to the same point. Crockett had turned the tables not with rage, but with stillness. For millions, the emotional payoff was personal. They weren't just entertained, they were validated. Social feeds filled with posts from people who had grown up being talked over, silenced, shouted down. Many wrote, last night. She stood for me. The hashtags, the memes, the applause, they were retellings of a deeper truth. People weren't celebrating cleverness alone. They were celebrating dignity finally being seen and rewarded. It was the kind of viral saga that would leave an imprint on the political imagination for years. An inflection point in how leadership could be portrayed. Crockett's name trended. For days, not because she yelled, but because she didn't have to. She became the rebuttal to the culture of panic and arrogance. Her reply, a cultural touchstone in progressive households, immigrant communities, in digital conversations alike, but beyond all the hashtags and headlines, there was a deeper question about America itself. When the applause finally subsided, when the social feeds began to roll into endless loops of clips and rewinds, a deeper truth settled in. And the confrontation between Karoline Leavitt and Jasmine Crockett was never about one lawsuit alone. It was about what those two women represented in that moment, the collision of desperation and dignity, of panic and poise. The contrast could not have been sharper. Leavitt, faced with the pressure of accountability, turned to pleading. Her voice rose higher, her words more frantic, her composure slipping through her fingers like water she could not grasp. She embodied what happens when arrogance meets consequence, when polish cannot protect fragile foundations. The sound of her plea, wrapped in entitlement and fear, echoed not as leadership, but as surrender. Crockett, on the other hand, showed the opposite. Standing steady, she let the firestorm swirl around her and remained anchored. She needed no theatrics, no screaming. Her reply landed with precision because it was anchored in truth, delivered with steel, forged in years of resilience. Silence before she spoke, audiences felt what real composure means. Strength, not as noise, but as control. That stark difference reached beyond the individuals. It became a reflection of America's deeper struggle. Whether the nation will reward those who shout the loudest or those who maintain dignity under fire, Crockett's reply whispered that there is another way. Leadership as service, not performance. Strength is composure, not panic. It reminded millions that true power is not measured in decibels, but in the steadiness to stand when others fall apart. It would have been easier for her to fold, to match volume with volume, fury with fury. What Crockett modeled was the courage to remain herself, to resist the trap of sinking to the same level of desperation that unraveled her opponent. That choice, the deliberate embrace of dignity, was the mic drop more powerful than words alone. This truth is universal. Families who've endured struggle know it. Immigrants who've weathered intimidating interviews and long waits for recognition know it. Workers whose calm persistence has carried them through dismissive bosses know it. True strength isn't panic, it's composure under fire. It is keeping your voice even when the world screams at you. It is refusing to collapse when others hope. You will end, if there is a lesson in this clash, it is that America desperately craves this kind of leadership. Not figures who weaponize volume, but figures who embody steadiness. Not those who make a spectacle of collapse, but those who carry the collective weight of their people quietly and firmly forward. Crockett's cold reply was bigger than politics. It was a renewal of faith that leaders can still lead by anchoring themselves in dignity. This moment felt generational. Young people watching saw that calm could be a weapon sharper than any insult. Communities dismissed or derided for years felt seen in her stillness. Even skeptics recognized the resonance of a simple truth cutting past theatrics. Dignity is louder than desperation. When Crockett stood her ground, she did more than answer Leavitt. She answered the doubt of millions, wondering whether composure could still stand against chaos in the political arena. America at its best is written in those moments. Patience. Instead of frenzy, service. Instead of posturing, clarity instead of collapse. It is immigrants braving storms with hope intact. It is families insisting on fairness for their children. It is workers fighting steadily for respect. Crockett's stand illuminated that deeper Americanness, the quiet revolution of dignity, refusing to yield. Her cold reply was not cruelty. It was justice, carried without hesitation. And by holding steady, she threw into relief the frightening fragility of arrogance past its prime. That was the symbolic weight of the night that true leadership lies, not in begging for mercy when consequences loom, but in modeling poise so undeniable that even opponents must acknowledge it. The world turned the clip into memes, hashtags, slogans, yes. But what lingered longer than the laughter was the seed of inspiration. The reassurance that composure is not weakness, that dignity is not silence, that calm can be revolutionary. Crockett demonstrated that in politics and in our own lives. Sometimes the coldest reply is the one that warms entire communities with pride. She did not just win the moment, she planted a lesson that when pressed, we should not descend into panic, but rise into composure. That as a nation, we must recalibrate our definition of strength. That justice walks quietly, but it walks firmly. The debate was over. But the lesson was just beginning, Karoline Leavitt begged. Jasmine Crockett replied coldly. That alone will be the line remembered, replayed, and retold long after the lights. In that debate hall dimmed, one woman, frantic and unraveling, pleading to escape accountability. The other, steady as stone, delivering a reply so composed and so cutting that it silenced chaos and electrified the room. The title of this story wasn't exaggeration, it was prophecy. And in that contrast lay the moral clarity. Justice is greater than self-preservation. Dignity is greater than arrogance. A poise is greater than panic. The world does not reward desperation the way it pretends to. What resounds, what reverberates across the country and beyond, is the image of someone who refuses to bow, refuses to scream, and chooses instead to stand with composure that cannot be bought or broken. Showed us what leadership looks like when it is rooted in service and dignity, it's not in fear of consequences. This moment cannot stay in that room. It belongs to the people who saw themselves reflected in her stillness, to the families who know the quiet courage of resilience, to the communities that know storms but also know how to endure them. Her cold reply was more than a clapback hit. Was a torch passed to everyone who has ever been underestimated. So don't just watch this clip. Don't just replay it for your own satisfaction. Turn it into a collective reminder. Share this so others never forget. Cold composure is power. Let her example echo across timelines, conversations, and classrooms, because America is best when we choose dignity over panic, justice over arrogance, and leaders who can remain steady when the noise grows deafening. This was more than a debate. It was a lesson in how to stand tall.